Hey, it's Matt Sager. And I've watched Spike Lee's Da 5 Bloods. It hit Netflix on Friday, the 12th. And I want to say that it's uncanny the way Spike Lee's movies always seem to be so unbelievably timely. But the truth is a lot more depressing than that. The truth is that in all the decades that Spike Lee has been a prominent, groundbreaking film director, and let's just be really honest here, long before that, for the entire history of the United States of America, this country has been rife with racial tension, strife, horrible injustice, inequality from the financial to the social. And Spike is simply a bold filmmaker, a great storyteller who doesn't shy away from the reality that so many of us get to ignore most of the time. Right now, a lot of us are becoming aware of a problem that people of color live with all their lives. That things are wrong, that lives are taken mercilessly, that people of color, by and large, systemically, are not treated the same as white people. They're not. They're treated for police as targets, often. Not painting with too broad of a brush here, but statistically speaking, there's no denying it. In times of war, they're often the first on the front lines, returned home with the least amount of glory and recompense. And to be honest, there's been nothing about these last 3 years, post-Obama and the time of Trump, in which one can pretend that there is not racial strife, in which one can pretend that there's not rampant racism, video after video after video. This, again, was going on all the time before the age of social media and viral video. But now we're able to see it. A woman in Central Park, not liking what a black man is doing, filming her breaking the law herself, unleashing her dog. And threatening with no sense whatsoever of any impropriety, threatening with absolute impunity to call the police and say an African-American man is threatening my life as a white woman. This is something we associate with, for instance, Emmett Till, stuff that we like to pretend is ancient history, and it's not. There are two Americas at the very least, and we are lucky enough, some of us, to inhabit a privileged version of it. There's another one that people of color have lived through, certainly as long as Spike's been a director, and, to be honest, throughout all time. Varying degrees of injustice, varying degrees of visibility, and varying degrees of a majority of the population, black, white, Latino, immigrant, etc., knowing about it, caring about it, and fighting to change it. A plurality of us, enough of us to make a change, to spark a movement, to change laws, to change the way the news is reported. This is one of those historic moments that just happens to be when Spike Lee's Da 5 Bloods premieres on Netflix. And it would seem that Spike has an uncanny sense of timing. But tragically, what's really going on is the world is turbulent once again. The world is in turmoil once again. More innocent people of color are dying, and it's making prominent headlines once again. And people are responding. This movie is just a powerful story, incredibly well told, that happens to exist in a world that sadly reflects the most sad elements of it. So as to the movie itself, I said this about BlacKkKlansman, and I'm now saying it about Da 5 Bloods. It's Spike Lee's best movie yet. Amazing that 30 years or so into his career as a prominent filmmaker, he is seemingly just hitting his stride, reaching new peaks, becoming a way better, way more ambitious storyteller than ever. And that's saying a lot. He made a huge splash when he debuted, continued to be a provocative, innovative, and spectacular director through the 90s, and he just keeps hitting new heights. Da 5 Bloods is a really ambitious tale, told beautifully and tragically, and spanning generations, telling the story of 4 Vietnam veterans, all African American. Their leader, who died at war, and whose legacy, like their adventures, they romanticize, reminisce with varying degrees of a sense of glory, achievement, tragedy, and glamour. It is to bring back his remains and a for real treasure of gold. A lot of call outs to the treasure of Sierra Madre in this movie. It is for those reasons that these people find themselves back in Vietnam, 4 of Da 5 Bloods. Their leader, Stormin' Norman, who died overseas in the war, is seen only in flashback, played excellently by Chadwick Boseman, And these flashbacks get more interesting and reveal more about the movie, its characters, and overarching story the more you pay attention to them. Because whoever Stormin' Norman really was during the Vietnam War, he is portrayed as an invincible, absolutely righteous warrior, the most eloquent speaker. He's portrayed, in other words, almost unrealistically in his grandeur. Whereas the soldiers who were reminiscing about him, they show up in these flashbacks pretty much as they appear during the rest of the movie in present day, which is to say they appear as men 50 years or so older than they could have possibly been during the Vietnam War. So their memories, their romanticization of this Norman and the war and their part of it is skewed by time, by what the war did to them, and what the intervening years since have done to them. And all of them have had very different trajectories in their life. One of them is a diehard MAGA Trump supporter, the man with perhaps the deepest connection to the very far left Norman. Another struck it rich as a businessman, then lost it all. He's been to the top of the mountain, and now he's back down in the gutter and very, very humble. Another man left a very important part of himself in Vietnam, a part he reconnects with throughout the course of this movie. And it's all very moving. They're all deeply real characters. All but, ironically, Norman, who appears only in flashback, and who is idealized to an extent that he can't possibly be portrayed quite as he was. Because these men are all flawed, and the way in which they see the world is deeply flawed. And that is explored throughout the movie. And so Norman was undoubtedly a great leader and a great man and a great unifier of this group of pretty different people. But he was almost certainly not as they remember him. I'll tell you this, minor spoiler alert here. The end he had in the war, the way in which he died, is not the way most of these people think he did. And I will just leave it at that, because I really recommend you check out this movie. Not necessarily because of anything that's going on in the world right now, although you could do a lot worse than to watch this movie, which is so wildly relevant, opening as it does with Muhammad Ali explaining why he won't go fight in the Vietnam War. Because the Vietnamese never pulled any racist shenanigans with him. Vietnamese never oppressed him, never told him he was less than a human being. So he would not fight the war. Angela Davis saying that if we don't fight back against the war in Vietnam, a future U.S. fascist state could very well be in our future. Bobby Seale talking about how African Americans were exploited, used for cannon fodder during World War II, and how now it was happening yet again in Vietnam. So sure, is it relevant? Very much so. But like all Spike Lee movies, it is a bold story, grandly told. A lot of themes at work here, mostly about the pointlessness of seeking grand treasure, certainly from a tortured past, about the need to go forward for all of us. I don't think it's a huge spoiler to say that a search for a fallen friend's remains and a treasure trove of CIA gold does not end spectacularly for any of the four Bloods, or the fifth junior Blood who ends up joining them on their mission of folly. Disaster of an adventure. What is really worth noticing is that in every decade that plays out over the course of the Five Bloods, there is constant discrimination, constant injustice, and a never-ending cycle of violence. That leaves scars on everyone involved in this movie, every character, and has affected the course of their life from the Vietnam War through the present day, and has massive ramifications on the fate of all characters by the time the movie's over. It's a fantastic adventure. It is a timely, relevant, thought-provoking film. It's a Spike Lee joint, and you can watch it now on Netflix. I recommend it very highly. The Five Bloods, streaming now. Thanks as always. Please feel free to leave comments, and of course, I'd love it if you followed me on social media. There are links in this episode's description as to how you can do that, in addition to links that will help you support this podcast. If you're checking this out on YouTube, please like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, or if you're listening on a podcast app or network, please subscribe there. I'd love it if you left me reviews, and I will talk with you soon.